My parents handed my sister the keys to a $4 million mansion and looked me dead in the eye to tell me I was born to be her maid. They demanded I serve drinks at her extravagant housewarming party, completely unaware that the woman they were publicly humiliating had just quietly secured a $102 million fortune. My name is Gemma. I am 33 years old. And I am currently staring at shattered crystal on a ridiculously expensive Persian rug. The sharp crash of the champagne, flute breaking, echoed through the massive, vaulted foyer, instantly killing the background jazz music and the lively chatter of 50 elite guests. Time seemed to freeze. I stood there in my stiff black catering apron, serving tray trembling slightly in my hands, as golden champagne soaked deep into the intricate silk fibers of the rug. What are you doing? The piercing screech of my mother, Beverly, sliced through the dead silence. She stomped toward me, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the imported marble floors, before sinking into the ruined rug. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not care that a jagged piece of crystal had grazed my ankle and drawn a thin line of blood. Instead, she grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging fiercely into my skin. You are so entirely useless, Gemma, my mother hissed, her voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. Look at what you have just done. This rug costs more than your entire catering business makes in a year. I kept my expression completely blank. I had spent my entire life perfecting the art of giving them absolutely nothing. I slowly pulled my arm out of her tight grip. I am sorry, I said, my voice steady and professional. Someone backed into my tray while I was turning. I will clean it up immediately. You will be a servant to your sister, so you do not need to cry or make pathetic excuses. My mother snapped back, her eyes flashing with a familiar cruel superiority. You were put here to help her shine. And you cannot even do that, right? A soft malicious giggle drifted from the grand spiral staircase. I looked up to see my younger sister, Sydney, descending the steps like royalty, holding court. She was 29, draped in a silk designer gown that probably cost a month of my rent, holding a fresh glass of expensive champagne. This was her night. Her new $4 million mansion. Her perfect life, all funded by our parents. Oh, let her be, Mom. Sydney cooed, though her smile was razor sharp. You know, Gemma gets overwhelmed when she's around successful people. It is not her fault she is clumsy. Sydney reached the bottom of the stairs and leaned heavily against her husband, Trey. Trey was 31, a tall, impeccably dressed African-American man who loved playing the role of a brilliant tech startup founder. He adjusted his custom-tailored suit jacket, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. Honestly, Gemma, Trey sneered, swirling his drink. The minimum wage aesthetic really does not suit this house. We have serious investors here tonight. People with actual net worth. You are embarrassing us. Could you just grab a towel and scrub the floor before it permanently stains? Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who desperately tried to keep you at the bottom. I looked around the room. 50 pairs of eyes were glued directly to me. These were my parents' country club friends, Trey's supposed venture capitalist buddies, and Sydney's fake internet influencer entourage. Not a single person stepped forward to intervene. Not a single person told my mother she was being out of line. To them, I was just the hired help who had messed up. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was an employee they did not even have to pay. My father, Richard, stood near the grand stone fireplace, swirling a glass of neat scotch. He caught my eye, shook his head in slow, calculated disappointment, and turned his back to me. That was his signature move. Silent. Crushing disapproval designed to make me feel small. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to drop to my knees, scrub the wet rug, and cry tears of frustration, while they asserted their dominance. For 33 years that was the established dynamic. Sydney was the golden child, destined for luxury and greatness. I was the scapegoat, the workhorse, the failure. They kept around just to make themselves feel bigger. I stared at the puddle of champagne, soaking into the expensive floorboards. Underneath my heavy catering apron, my phone was tucked safely in my pocket. I knew exactly what was sitting in my secure email inbox at that very moment. I knew about the newly formed blind trust. I knew that my net worth was currently sitting at exactly $102 million. I took a deep breath. The air in the mansion suddenly felt incredibly thin, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I did not reach for a towel. I stood perfectly still in the middle of the mess. The silence in the grand room stretched until my father, Richard, finally cleared his throat. He stepped into the center of the foyer, holding his Scotch glass high. He looked at the crowd, offering a smooth, practiced smile that completely ignored my bleeding ankle. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father announced, "please excuse this disruption. Let this demonstrate the basic economics. We discuss over golf." A few older men chuckled. My mother nodded. "You see," my father continued, gesturing very loosely in my direction, "the world requires balance. Some children are born to lead and create immense value." He paused to smile warmly at Sydney and Trey. "Others are simply born to serve. We need visionaries to build mansions and laborious to scrub the floors when they spill the champagne." Laughter rippled through the room. It was the resonant laughter of wealthy people, enjoying someone being put in their place. Sydney beamed, leaning against Trey's shoulder. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. The ghost of every childhood dinner, where I was the punchline. But tonight the tightness evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. Trey stepped forward, gently pulling away from Sydney. He pulled a folded paper from his blazer, clearly waiting all night to use it. He unfolded it and held it out. "Since you are doing nothing to fix your mess, we will handle this like professionals." Trey said this vintage silk Persian rug was appraised just last week. The deep cleaning alone will cost an absolute fortune, assuming the stain even comes out. He shoved the paper into my hand. It was an itemized invoice from the designer. "That is a $5,000 damage fee," Trey stated loudly. "And since your little catering business is legally responsible for damages incurred on the premises, I expect you to cover it. Consider it a hard lesson in liability. Pay up, Gemma, or I will have my lawyers draft a lawsuit that will shut down your kitchen by Monday morning." My mother scoffed loudly from the sidelines. $5,000? She clearly does not have $5,000. Trey, she lives in a showbox. She will be paying this off in installments for the next 3 years. I looked down at the invoice. $5,000. A week ago, that number would have given me a panic attack. I would have begged for time. I would have offered to work their parties for free to pay off the debt. But today $5,000 was quite literally a fraction of the interest my new trust account generated while I was sleeping. I did not cry. I did not apologize. I calmly reached into the pocket of my black apron. Trey laughed, assuming I was reaching for a tissue to wipe my tears. "Do not start crying now," he mocked. "Tears do not pay the bills." I bypassed the tissues and pulled out my wallet. I slid a single solid metal card from the leather slot. It was matte black, completely unbranded on the front, except for the distinctive, subtle engraving of a centurion. It was heavy. It was the kind of card you could not apply for. You had to be invited. I held it between my index and middle finger and extended my arm. Trey stared at it, his confident smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. Before he burst into loud theatrical laughter, he turned to the crowd. "Are you kidding me right now? A fake black card? You ordered a custom debit card online to look rich in front of our guests. That is the most pathetic thing I have ever seen." I completely ignored his childish mockery. I turned my head and locked eyes with David, the senior event manager I had hired to help coordinate the catering staff. David was standing near the kitchen doors, looking terrified. "David," I called out, my voice ringing clear and authoritative across the silent room. "Bring me the mobile payment terminal." David rushed over to me, carrying the sleek square reader. His hands were shaking slightly. "Charge this for $5,000, I instructed calmly. "Add a 20% gratuity for yourself and the rest of the kitchen staff for having to endure this hostile environment." I dropped the card onto David's silver tray. The heavy metal hit the silver surface with a loud, undeniable clank that echoed through the entire foyer. It did not sound like cheap plastic. It sounded exactly like what it truly was: pure unfiltered wealth. Trey stopped his theatrical laughing immediately. His eyes darted down to the tray, staring hard at the metal card. As David nervously inserted the chip into the reader, the machine beeped instantly. The screen flashed approved. The sharp beep of the mobile terminal was the loudest sound in the room. I watched Trey stare at the tiny digital screen, his jaw practically unhinged. The arrogant smirk that usually lived on his face had completely vanished, replaced by a sudden and intense confusion. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at my father, who was suddenly gripping his glass of scotch a little too tightly. My mother stood completely frozen, her eyes darting between the payment terminal and my entirely impassive face. I did not wait for them to process what had just happened. I smoothly reached out, plucked the heavy metal card from the silver tray, and slipped it safely back into my pocket. "David," I said, my voice steady and professional, "please ensure the cleaning crew is called immediately. The rest of the staff should focus on the past hors d'oeuvres." I turned my back on the 50 silent guests and pushed through the heavy, wooden double doors leading into the massive gourmet kitchen. The moment the door swung shut behind me, the oppressive and suffocating atmosphere of my family vanished. The kitchen was a sanctuary of stainless steel, humming refrigerators, and the sharp scent of roasted garlic and fresh herbs. My catering team was buzzing around the prep stations, but they all froze when I walked in. They had heard everything through the doors. A young prep cook named Lily looked at me with wide eyes, holding a large tray of crostinis. Lily whispered nervously, "Are you okay? We heard what your mother said. We heard what Trey demanded from you." "I am perfectly fine, Lily," I replied, walking over to the nearest sink to wash my hands. "Let us stay focused on the menu. We have 60 plates of seared scallops to finish, and the caviar needs to be chilled properly before service." I dried my hands and tied my black catering apron a little tighter. It was stained with a few drops of spilled champagne and a smudge of flour. The uniform of the servant my family so desperately needed me to be. I began expertly plaiting the tiny and intricate appetizers. My hands moved with practiced precision, arranging delicate micro-greens over the seared scallops. I found comfort in the rhythm of the kitchen. It was the only place I had ever felt a sense of absolute control. Suddenly the phone in my pocket vibrated, with a long and distinct buzz. It was the secure, encrypted alert I had set up exclusively for my legal team. I wiped my hands on a clean towel, stepped away from the busy prep station, and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated the dim corner of the kitchen. It was a message from Mr. Harrison, the senior wealth management attorney I had retained secretly over a month ago. I opened the secure portal. The message was brief, professional, and entirely life-altering. The Horizon Blind Trust is fully funded. $102 million post-tax has cleared. The final paperwork for the $8 million Bell Air estate is complete, and the keys are secured. With the private security team, you are officially ready to proceed. I read the words 3 times. $102 million. Post-tax. It was a number so large it felt almost abstract. Like a line of code rather than actual currency. Yet it was real. It was sitting in a trust. Completely insulated from my parents. From Sydney and from Trey. They could not touch it. They could not even find it. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. I turned and faced the massive double-door, stainless steel refrigerator. The highly polished metal acted like a slightly distorted mirror. I stared at my reflection. I saw a 33-year-old woman in a stained black apron. Her hair pulled back into a tight and practical bun. I saw the cheap, sensible shoes I wore to stand for 14 hours a day. I saw the tiny scratch on my ankle. From the broken champagne glass. Still slowly weeping a single drop of blood. This was the Gemma my family knew. The workhorse. The complete failure. The maid who was only invited to the mansion to serve the people who actually mattered. But looking closer at my reflection in that cold steel, I saw something else entirely. I saw the posture of a woman who literally owned the ground they walked on. The contrast was almost intoxicating. My family was out there in the foyer, desperately clinging to their fragile illusions of superiority, measuring their worth by a $4 million house. They begged the bank to approve. Meanwhile, I was standing in their kitchen, quietly holding a massive fortune that could buy their entire lives 20 times over. I did not need their validation anymore. I did not need to scream or cry, or demand their basic respect. The power dynamic had violently shifted, and they were entirely oblivious. A slow and dangerous smile finally broke across my face. The heavy stainless steel doors of the kitchen violently swung open, instantly shattering the quiet rhythm my team had finally established. I watched the reflection in the refrigerator door. Before I even turned around, it was Sydney. Her face was flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. The delicate silk of her designer gown swishing aggressively as she stormed into my workspace. She marched straight toward me, completely ignoring the busy prep cooks in the hot stoves. She stopped inches from my face, her voice a harsh, demanding whisper, designed to cut deep, without echoing into the dining room. "What the hell was that out there, Gemma?" Sydney hissed, her eyes narrowing into dark slits. "You think you are so clever, pulling out some fake metal card to embarrass my husband in front of his investors. You think making a scene makes you look important. It makes you look desperate." I turned away from the refrigerator and faced her. I did not say a word. I simply looked at her. For the first time in my life, I was looking at my younger sister, not as a golden child I had to please, but as a completely insignificant stranger, throwing a temper tantrum in a house she could not actually afford. "Since you clearly do not know how to act around people of our status," Sydney continued, crossing her arms tightly across her chest, "you are done serving for the night. You are making my guests uncomfortable. Actually, you are making me uncomfortable." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the back corner of the kitchen, where 4 large, industrial trash bins were overflowing with discarded food, prep and empty boxes. "You are going to take all of that garbage down to the basement," Sydney ordered. and you are going to use the service elevator at the back of the house. Do not walk through the main hallway. Do not let any of my friends see you again. When you are done taking out the trash, you can wait in your little catering van until the party is over. The kitchen went completely dead. The sound of sizzling scallops and chopping knives stopped abruptly. Lily, the young prep cook, stared at us in absolute shock. David, the event manager, looked like he wanted to sink into the floorboards. They were waiting for me to apologize. They were waiting for the Gemma they knew to nod, pick up the heavy black trash bags, and quietly slip away into the shadows of the service elevator. Instead, I reached up to the back of my neck. I grasped the knot of my stained black catering apron. With one swift, fluid motion, I untied it. I pulled the heavy fabric over my head and let it drop onto the pristine stainless steel prep counter with a soft thud. It landed right next to the tray of delicate caviar appetizers I was supposed to serve. Sydney stared at the discarded apron, her arrogant expression faltering into genuine confusion. "What are you doing? I told you to take out the trash." "I am done taking out the trash, Sydney," I said. My voice was calm, completely devoid of the fear or subservience she expected. "In fact, I am done with all of it. Have a wonderful housewarming party." I stepped around her, leaving her standing in the middle of my kitchen. I did not head for the back door. I did not walk toward the hidden service elevator. I walked straight toward the heavy, wooden double doors that led directly back into the grand foyer. "You get back here right now," Sydney shrieked, her voice cracking as the facade of the elegant hostess completely crumbled. I pushed through the double doors. The bright lights of the party hit my eyes, and the lively jazz music washed over me. The 50 elite guests were mingling, holding fresh drinks, acting as if the earlier humiliation had never happened. When I stepped into the room, sans apron standing tall, the conversation began to die down. Once again, I walked with absolute purpose. I did not rush, and I certainly did not lower my head. I walked directly through the center of the VIP crowd. The wealthy guests, the venture capitalists, the fake influencers. They all parted ways for me like the Red Sea. My parents were standing near the grand staircase. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest in horror, as she realized I was walking out the front door instead of using the servant exit. Sydney burst through the kitchen doors right behind me, completely losing her composure. "You cannot just leave," she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "If you walk out that door, you are finished, Gemma. I will go on Yelp right now. I will ruin your catering business. I will tell every country club in this city that you are a thief and a liar. You will never cook for anyone again." I reached the massive custom oak front doors. I wrapped my hand around the heavy brass handle and pulled the door open. The cool, crisp night air rushed in, carrying the scent of expensive jasmine planted along her driveway. I paused on the threshold just for a moment. I did not turn around to look at Sydney's red, screaming face. I did not look at my parents, standing in stunned silence. I simply stepped out into the night, letting the heavy door pull shut behind me with a loud, final click, leaving them locked inside their beautiful hollow cage. 2 days passed in absolute silence. I did not receive a single text message or missed call apologizing for the disaster at the mansion. Instead, on Tuesday morning, my phone lit up with a cold, demanding text from my father. "Be at our house at noon. We have family business to discuss. Bring your financial records." I almost laughed. A week ago, a text like that would have sent me into a spiral of panic. I would have spent hours reviewing my meager catering ledger, wondering what I had done wrong. Now, sitting at the small laminate counter of my cramped 600 square foot condo, I simply finished my coffee, I put on a clean casual outfit, got into my modest sedan, and drove to the affluent neighborhood where I grew up. My parents lived in a sprawling colonial-style house that always felt more like a museum than a home. When I walked through the front door, the heavy silence immediately pressed down on me. My mother Beverly and my father Richard were sitting rigidly in the formal living room. This room was reserved strictly for serious matters and impressing guests. A thick stack of printed documents rested, perfectly centered on the glass coffee table between them. "Sit down, Gemma," my father commanded, not even bothering to offer a greeting. He gestured sharply to the stiff wingback chair opposite the sofa. I sat down slowly, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I did not look nervously at the papers. I looked directly into his eyes, waiting. "We are going to bypass the theaters of Saturday night," my father began, lacing his fingers together in a tight grip. "What you did was deeply embarrassing, but we are willing to move past your little tantrum, because family must stand united during transitional periods." Trey is currently restructuring his tech startup. He is pivoting the business model, and that requires immediate capital. I stared at him, letting the corporate buzzwords hang in the sterile air of the living room. Restructuring, pivoting, capital. It was a very polite, sanitized way of saying Trey was rapidly running out of other investor money, and his investors were demanding answers. "And what exactly does his failing business have to do with me?" I asked, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "Do not use that tone with us," my mother snapped, leaning forward so abruptly that her pearl necklace swung against her chest. Her perfectly styled hair barely moved. "Trey is an innovator. He is just facing a temporary cash flow issue. Your father and I have already done our part by helping them secure the new mansion. Now it is your turn to step up and support your sister." Today, my father slid the thick stack of papers across the glass table toward me. "I want you to review these documents and sign them," he instructed. "I have already spoken to a loan officer at my bank. Given the current equity you hold in your little apartment, you are approved for a second mortgage. You are going to sign these papers, extract $100,000 in cash, and transfer it directly to his business account." By Friday, I looked down at the documents. They had actually taken the liberty of drafting a second mortgage application for my home without my consent. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They wanted me to put my only shelter on the line to fund the delusions of a man who had literally tried to extort $5,000 from me just 48 hours prior. They wanted me to shoulder a massive debt I could never repay on a chef salary. "You want me to take out a mortgage on my condo to give Trey $100,000. "Yes," my father said very firmly, speaking slowly, as if he were explaining basic math to a toddler. "It is an investment in your family legacy." My mother sighed loudly, crossing her legs and looking at me with pure condescension. "Be practical, Gemma. You are 33, single, and you work as a cook. You do not actually need to own a house. If you cannot afford the new mortgage payments, you can just rent a small studio apartment closer to the commercial kitchens." Sydney, on the other hand, has a prominent husband and a social standing to maintain. She has a real family. They need financial security. Her words were designed to cut me down to the bone. "You are single and a cook. You do not need a house. Sydney has a real family." For my entire life, they had viewed me not as a human being, but as a spare resource to be harvested. Everything I worked for was collateral for the golden child. I looked down at the crisp, white pages of the loan application. They had already filled out my name, my address, and my estimated income. All they needed was my signature to chain me to a massive financial burden for the next 30 years. I reached out, picked up the expensive fountain pen my father had placed next to the stack, and examined it for a moment. Then, I set the pen down gently on the glass coffee table and pushed the documents back toward him. No, I said. A single syllable hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I did not offer an explanation. I did not soften the blow with an apology or an excuse about my finances. I just said no. My mother let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest, as if she had been physically struck. "Excuse me," she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "What do you mean no? We are talking about your sister's livelihood, Gemma. We are talking about saving your brother-in-law's company." "I mean absolutely not," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I am not taking out a second mortgage on my home. I am not giving Trey $100,000 and I am certainly not going to subsidize a lifestyle he cannot afford. Just because you are too embarrassed to admit his business is failing." My father slammed his open palm down on the glass coffee table. The sound cracked through the living room like a gunshot. The stack of papers shifted and my mother flinched. "You ungrateful little brat," my father snarled, his face rapidly turning a dark shade of crimson. His calm corporate demeanor completely dissolved, revealing the vicious bully underneath. "We fed you, we clothed you. We allowed you to be part of this family. And when we ask you for one simple sacrifice, to help the people who actually matter, you sit there and disrespect us." I stared right back at him. Letting Trey extort me for $5,000 at a party was disrespect. I countered, "This is just common sense." "The answer is no." My father stood up. He towered over me, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me, the way he had when I was a child. But I did not shrink back into the wingback chair. "You think you are so independent because you run a little catering business," my father said, his voice dropping into a low venomous register. "You think you do not need us. Let me remind you exactly how this city works, Gemma. I sit on the board of the Regional Homeowners Association. I play golf every single Sunday with the presidents of the 3 largest country clubs in this county. Who do you think hires you for those fancy weddings and corporate galas? My wealthy friends do." He leaned closer, resting his knuckles on the glass table. "If you walk out of here without signing those papers, I will make a few phone calls," he threatened, his eyes locking onto mine with pure malice. "I will tell them you are unreliable. I will tell them you steal from your clients. I will tell them you have a severe drinking problem. I will have you completely blacklisted from every gated community. You will never serve a single plate of food in this city ever again. Your little business will go completely bankrupt before the end of the month." My mother crossed her arms, looking down at me with a triumphant sneer. She loved it when he used his power to crush people. "You have exactly 48 hours," my father commanded. "You take these papers, you sign them, and you bring them back to me by noon on Thursday. If you do not, you are no longer our daughter. We will completely cut you out of this family. You will be disowned, disgraced, and unemployed. It is your choice, Gemma. Choose very carefully." I sat there for a moment, letting his ultimatum echo in the quiet room. Disowned, disgraced, cut out of the family forever. For 33 years the threat of losing their approval had kept me entirely trapped in their toxic web. They thought it was the ultimate punishment. They had no idea. It was the exact permission I had been waiting for my entire life. The threat to my business meant absolutely nothing to a woman with $102 million secured in a high-yield, blind trust. They were threatening to burn down a wooden shack while I was already holding the keys to a fortress. I stood up slowly, smoothing out the front of my casual shirt. I did not touch the stack of papers. Thursday at noon, I repeated calmly, "I understand completely." I turned my back on them and walked out of the formal living room. I strode down the long hallway, opened the heavy front door, and stepped out into the bright morning sun. As I walked down their pristine driveway toward my modest sedan, a strange sensation washed over me. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood was suddenly gone. I reached my car, unlocked the door, and caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I was smiling. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely, radiantly smiling. I drove straight from my parents' affluent, suburban neighborhood back to my cramped, 600 square foot apartment. I did not waste a single second worrying about their 48-hour deadline. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for a premium, discreet relocation service my attorney had highly recommended. Within 2 hours, a team of impeccably dressed movers arrived at my door. I instructed them to pack only my personal clothing, my extensive collection of rare culinary books, and my professional chef knives. Everything else, the cheap laminate furniture, the sagging mattress, the cracked dishes I had used for years, was to be donated or thrown away. I stood in the center of the empty living room, looking at the faded paint on the walls. This tiny space had been my sanctuary and my prison. It was the only place I could afford, on a catering budget, while my parents funneled all their wealth into Sydney. Now, it was just an empty box I was leaving behind forever. I handed the spare keys to the building manager, without a single ounce of nostalgia, and stepped into the back of the sleek black town car my security team had arranged. The drive from my old neighborhood to Bel Air took less than an hour, but it felt like crossing into an entirely different universe as the luxury town car navigated the winding, perfectly manicured roads of the ultra-exclusive enclave. The lingering tension in my shoulders completely dissolved. We pulled up to a massive set of wrought iron gates, flanked by towering privacy hedges. The heavy gates silently glided open at our approach, revealing a sweeping cobblestone driveway that led directly to my new reality. The $8 million estate was a breathtaking masterpiece of modern architecture. It featured gleaming white stucco, imported terracotta roof tiles, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed, panoramic view of the entire Los Angeles skyline. It was not just a house. It was a fortress of absolute independence. I stepped out of the vehicle and took a deep breath of the crisp, fragrant air. There were no parents here to constantly judge me. There was no sister here to demand my servitude. There was only me and the quiet, undeniable power of the empire I was about to build. From the ground up, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sharp, dark suit walked out the double front doors to greet me. He introduced himself as Garrison, the lead operative of the private security firm my attorney had personally contracted. Garrison was former military intelligence, and his team consisted entirely of highly trained ex-Special Forces personnel. He handed me a sleek, digital tablet to initialize the estate protocols. I walked through the grand entryway, systematically pressing my thumb against the biometric scanners installed at every major access point. Garrison explained that the entire perimeter was constantly monitored by 24-hour thermal cameras, laser motion sensors, and a dedicated off-site control room. Nobody could drive up the private road, let alone approach the main gates, without my explicit digital authorization. I finalized the system setup, registering my fingerprints and retinal scans. My father's vicious threat to completely ruin my life felt incredibly distant and pathetic. As I watched the heavy, steel-reinforced doors lock behind me, with a satisfying magnetic click, I was entirely untouchable. They could never force their way into my life. Ever again I handed the tablet back to Garrison, and thanked him for his thorough work. Garrison led me through the expansive living areas. But I only had one destination in mind: the kitchen. When I finally pushed open the frosted glass doors, I actually gasped out loud. My wealth management attorney had followed my exact architectural specifications perfectly. It was a state-of-the-art commercial-grade sanctuary, brilliantly disguised as a luxury residential kitchen. It featured a massive 14-foot Calcutta marble island, dual professional-grade ranges with 12 individual burners, a walk-in temperature-controlled pantry, and an entire wall dedicated to sub-zero refrigeration. The overhead ventilation system was completely silent, and the pristine countertops gleamed under the custom recessed track lighting. I walked over to the center island and slowly unrolled my heavy leather knife roll. I placed my custom forged Japanese steel blades onto the cool marble surface, one by one. For my entire adult life I had cooked purely to survive. I had cooked to pay off mounting debts, to appease demanding clients, and to serve my ungrateful family. Now, standing alone in the center of this magnificent room, I realized I would only ever cook for myself, and those I truly valued. I smiled, poured a glass of water and planned my menu perfectly. 3 days into my new life of absolute tranquility, the universe decided it was time to let a single thread of my massive secret unravel. It happened completely by accident. On a bright Tuesday afternoon, under the blinding California sun, my sister Sydney was currently standing on the pristine sidewalk in one of the most exclusive shopping districts in Bel Air, holding her phone at arm's length. She was live streaming a day in the life vlog to her thousands of fake followers. She was wearing a brightly colored summer dress. She had forced Trey to put on his already maxed out credit card, spinning around and pointing her phone camera at the luxury storefronts she could barely afford to look at. Back at his rented office space across the city, Trey was sitting at his desk, aggressively ignoring the mounting pile of past due notices from his vendors. He was watching Sydney's live stream on his computer monitor, ensuring she was maintaining the flawless facade of immense wealth that his few remaining investors expected to see. He watched her pout her lips, toss her hair, and talk to her audience about the grueling, exhausting schedule of managing a $4 million mansion. Meanwhile, I was actually in the area with a genuine purpose. I needed an entirely new wardrobe to match my new reality. I had booked a private closed-door appointment at one of the most elite designer boutiques on the street, a place that required a 6-figure minimum spend just to walk through the front door. As Sydney continued to ramble to her phone about the struggles of finding good household help, my transportation arrived exactly in her background frame. It was a pristine midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom. It glided to a halt right next to the curb, stopping directly behind where Sydney was standing. On the sidewalk, on the live stream, the massive vehicle dominated the entire background. Trey leaned forward in his office chair, his eyes narrowing at the screen. He recognized the car immediately as a symbol of liquid, untouchable wealth. He watched as a man in a sharp suit stepped out of the driver's side and quickly walked around to open the rear passenger door. Another man, equally well dressed and sporting a coiled earpiece, stepped out from a trailing black SUV and scanned the sidewalk with militant precision. Then I stepped out of the Rolls-Royce. I was not wearing my stained catering apron. I was not wearing my sensible non-slip kitchen shoes. I was wearing an immaculate, custom-tailored cream designer suit. That fit me perfectly. My hair was blown out smoothly. And I was carrying a leather handbag. That cost more than the entire down payment on the condo I had just abandoned. I looked calm, powerful and entirely out of place in the pathetic narrative my family had constructed for me. Sydney was completely oblivious to the scene unfolding right behind her. She was so entirely focused on her own reflection in the front-facing camera that she did not even bother to turn around and see the newly minted billionaire stepping onto the sidewalk. She just kept talking to her screen, complaining about how hard it was to find a decent private chef for her upcoming dinner parties, now that her sister was acting so ungrateful. But Trey saw everything. In his quiet office, Trey completely froze. He hit the screen record button on his keyboard. With a frantic, heavy slap of his hand, he paused the live video feed, zoomed in on the background, and stared directly at the high-definition image of my face. There was absolutely no mistaking it. It was Gemma, the sister, who was supposed to be weeping in her tiny apartment right now over the threat of being officially disowned. The woman who supposedly lived paycheck to paycheck, serving hors d'oeuvres to his wealthy friends. Trey watched in absolute disbelief as my two massive bodyguards seamlessly flanked me. They escorted me past the velvet ropes and directly through the heavy glass doors of the boutique. The doors, which were strictly appointment only, swung wide open for me, without a single question asked by the intimidating doorman. The security detail then took their protective positions outside, on the sidewalk, their eyes sweeping the street for any potential threats. Trey felt the blood drain rapidly from his face. His mind started racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. He replayed the recorded clip again and again, obsessively analyzing every single frame. The Rolls-Royce, the custom suit, the private military-grade security team. None of it made any logical sense. A catering chef did not ride in a phantom. A woman, who was just ordered to take out a second mortgage on a cheap apartment, did not require armed bodyguards to go shopping in Bel Air. Why does the Maid have a security detail? Trey whispered out loud to himself in the empty office. He slammed his laptop shut, his breathing growing shallow and rapid. His desperation for cash was instantly replaced by a dark, consuming paranoia. He knew I was hiding something massive. He did not know exactly what it was yet, but his greedy mind immediately went to work. He knew I had access to serious money, and he was determined to get his hands on it. Trey sat in the suffocating silence of his rented office space. The image of the black Rolls-Royce completely burned into his retinas. His tech startup was not just failing. It was an empty shell game, entirely collapsing in on itself. His business bank account was currently sitting at negative $4,000. His credit cards were maxed out. From buying Sydney designer bags to maintain their fake internet lifestyle, worse, the $2 million predatory loan he had secretly taken out from a private equity firm was coming due. And those were not lenders who accepted apologies. They were lenders who seized assets and destroyed lives. He needed cash immediately. The idea that the family scapegoat, the woman supposed to be wearing a stained catering apron, was suddenly living in luxury made him physically sick. His greedy mind went to work constructing a narrative, making sense to his inflated ego. Gemma was just a cook. She did not have the drive to build real wealth. Someone else had to be funding this. Trey convinced himself that she had found a wealthy benefactor, a sugar daddy who demanded absolute discretion. If Gemma was playing the role of a high-priced mistress to some married billionaire, Trey knew. She would do anything to keep that information hidden. Especially now. She was walking around Bel Air acting like royalty. Scandal meant leverage. Leverage meant blackmail. And blackmail meant the massive infusion of cash his dying company desperately needed. Trey locked his door and pulled down the window blinds. He was going to find out exactly who was signing her checks. And he was going to force her to cut him a massive piece of the pie. He cracked his knuckles and opened a heavily encrypted browser on his laptop. Before Trey became a supposed visionary founder, he worked in low-level data security. He knew exactly how to navigate the dark corners of the internet, where information is sold without legal oversight. He did not need a court order or valid business reason to run a background check. He just needed the right software and a few $100s in cryptocurrency. He typed her full legal name and date of birth. He pulled up the digital copy of the fraudulent second mortgage application my parents tried to force me to sign. My father had conveniently filled out my social security number on that form, leaving the document in Trey's possession. Trey typed the 9 digits into the illegal database and hit enter. He was committing federal identity theft, but he was entirely beyond caring about the law. At this point, he simply needed the payout. The screen went dark for a few agonizing seconds as the algorithm scraped through thousands of financial institutions, tax records, and hidden banking networks. Trey leaned closer to the monitor, his heart hammering against his ribs. He fully expected to see a long list of massive, untraceable wire transfers from an offshore account. He expected to find shared property deeds or a suspicious allowance deposited into her modest checking account. He wanted the smoking gun that would allow him to march up to those heavy iron gates in Bel Air and demand $500,000 for his absolute silence. The progress bar reached 100%. The screen flashed bright white, illuminating Trey's sweaty face in the dim office. A massive, incredibly detailed financial dossier populated on the monitor. Trey quickly scrolled past the very basic information. He skipped my catering income and the lease agreement for the condo I had abandoned. He was looking for the hidden wealth, the massive influx of dirty money. As he dug deeper into the comprehensive credit report, his confident smirk slowly vanished. There were no offshore wire transfers. There were no shared bank accounts with a mysterious billionaire. There was no sugar daddy. Instead, Trey found something far more confusing and significantly more dangerous. He noticed a bizarre anomaly buried deep in the historical data of my credit file. He frowned, highlighting a section of the report from 15 years ago, when I was just 18 years old, a time when I was barely making minimum wage, washing dishes in a local diner. My credit profile showed a massive explosion of financial activity. Someone had opened 5 different high-limit credit cards and secured a massive personal bank loan, all under my name and my social security number. Trace scrolled further down, his eyes widening in absolute shock. The total amount of borrowed money was exactly $100,000, and every single cent of it had been completely defaulted on, completely destroying my credit score. For over a decade, Trey stared at the screen, realizing he had not found a sugar daddy. He had found a massive crime. Trey leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes scanning the intricate details of the defaulted loans. The dates matched up perfectly with the year I turned 18. He clicked on the digital copies of the original loan applications attached to the credit file. The home address listed on the paperwork was my parents' sprawling colonial house. The emergency contact was my father, Richard, and the signature at the bottom, claiming to be mine, was a blatant, sloppy forgery. It was my mother's distinct looping handwriting. Trey sat back in his chair, the pieces rapidly snapping together in his mind. He knew the family history perfectly well. He knew that 15 years ago, my parents had suddenly sent Sydney on an incredibly expensive, year-long European excursion and completely remodeled their house. Now he knew exactly how they funded that luxury. They stole their own daughter's identity, maxed out massive lines of credit, and left me holding the bag. This was the exact reason I had been denied federal student loans for culinary school. When I was 19, I stood in the financial aid office, completely devastated, listening to a counselor tell me my credit was utterly destroyed. My parents had feigned shock and profound disappointment at the time, using my lack of formal education to further trap me in their service. But Trey found something else. Something that made his blood run completely cold. He noticed a digital footprint on the credit bureau's server. 6 months ago, someone had requested certified copies of all these fraudulent documents. Someone had initiated a formal dispute process and compiled an extensive digital dossier containing every forged signature, every bank transfer, and every piece of identifying metadata. It was me. I had known about their crime for years, quietly gathering irrefutable proof, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Trey did not waste another single second. He printed the entire 80-page dossier, shoved the papers into his leather briefcase, and ran out to his car. He drove recklessly across town, speeding through red lights, until he reached my parents' affluent suburban neighborhood. He aggressively pulled into their driveway, threw the car in park, and burst through the front door without even knocking. Richard and Beverly were sitting in the formal living room, sipping afternoon tea, and complaining about my stubborn attitude. Trey did not offer a greeting. He marched straight over to the glass coffee table, and zipped his briefcase, and slammed the thick stack of printed evidence down, right next to their delicate porcelain teacups. "What is the exact meaning of this, Trey?" my father demanded, standing up quickly, with an irritated, authoritative scowl. Trey pointed a shaking finger at the top page of the dossier. "It means your entire life is about to completely collapse. Richard I just ran a deep background check on Gemma. I saw the private loans. I saw the forged signatures. I know that you and Beverly stole $100,000 in her name when she was just 18 years old." My mother's teacup froze halfway to her mouth. My father's irritated scowl vanished instantly, replied by a sudden sickening pale color that drained all the life from his face. "Keep your voice down right now," my father hissed frantically, glancing toward the open hallway. It was a private family matter. We were going through a difficult financial transition back then, and Sydney absolutely needed that European program for her college applications. Gemma was just working at a local diner. She did not need credit. We were going to pay it all back eventually. But you did not pay it back," Trey shouted, completely losing his corporate composure. "You let it default. You ruined her financial life. But that is not even the worst part of this disaster. Gemma knows everything. She has the certified documents. She has been building a legal case against you. For months." My mother carefully set her teacup down, her hands suddenly trembling violently. "What do you mean she knows? She is just a caterer. She does not have the resources to hire a lawyer. She is not just a caterer anymore," Beverly Trey snapped, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I saw her in Bel Air today. She stepped out of a brand new Rolls-Royce, wearing custom designer clothes, surrounded by a private military security detail. I thought she had found a rich boyfriend. But this is entirely different. She has real power now. She has money. And she is holding federal wire fraud and identity theft charges. Right over your heads. The formal living room fell into a suffocating, terrifying silence. The reality of the situation crashed down on my parents. With the weight of a freight train. They had spent the last 15 years treating me like an indentured servant. Convinced I was trapped. Now they realized I was not trapped at all. I was a ticking time bomb. They had unknowingly handed me the detonator years ago, and my father's recent threat to ruin my business had just started the final countdown. The suffocating silence in my parents' formal living room was suddenly shattered by the aggressive rapid-fire buzzing of Trey's cell phone. He was still standing over the glass coffee table, staring at the physical evidence of my parents' massive federal crime, when his screen lit up with a flood of notifications. At the exact same moment, my mother's phone resting on the side table began to violently vibrate. Then my father's phone chimed. It was a synchronized chorus of digital panic. Trey reluctantly pulled his eyes away from the fraudulent loan documents and picked up his phone. He swiped open the screen, and his expression instantly morphed from paranoid terror to complete unadulterated shock. He was staring at a breaking news alert from a notoriously aggressive financial tabloid website. The headline was plastered in bold, inescapable letters across his screen. Mystery of the $102 million lottery winner finally solved. My parents remained frozen on the sofa, too paralyzed by the revelation of their past crimes to even check their ringing devices. Reddit. My father croaked, his voice barely a whisper, dreading what new disaster was about to fall upon them. Trey swallowed hard, his throat completely dry. He began to read the article aloud, his voice trembling slightly as the magnitude of the numbers hit him. According to the article, the largest state lottery jackpot in history had been quietly claimed weeks ago by an anonymous entity known only as the Horizon Blind Trust. The financial maneuvers were executed flawlessly to protect the identity of the newly minted millionaire. The trust immediately purchased a sprawling $8 million fortress in Bel Air, completely insulated from public records. But a single, careless mistake unraveled the entire veil of secrecy. A junior paralegal working for the elite real estate firm handling the Bel Air transaction had filed a secondary, routine county property tax assessment form, instead of listing the Horizon Blind Trust as the primary holding entity. The sloppy paralegal had accidentally entered my full legal name on the public filing. Trey kept reading, his eyes scanning the paragraphs, as the tabloid explained how relentless internet sleuths had discovered the administrative blunder. A group of amateur digital investigators, obsessed with unmasking the lottery winner, had set up automated alerts for high-value real estate transactions in Los Angeles County. The moment the paralegal filed that tax document, the sleuths received the data. But a name on a tax form was not enough to confirm identity. They needed visual proof. That was exactly when Sydney's disastrous day in the life vlog provided the final fatal puzzle piece. The tabloid article featured a massive, high-definition screenshot taken directly from my sister's live stream earlier that afternoon. It showed the pristine Rolls-Royce, the military-grade security detail, and me stepping onto the Bel Air sidewalk in my custom designer suit. The internet sleuths had cross-referenced the timing of the live stream, the geographical location of the luxury boutique, and the newly filed property tax records. The dots were connected with devastating precision. The massive secret was officially out now. The woman in the viral screenshot, the woman wearing the immaculate cream suit and commanding a private army, was the sole owner of the $102 $1 million fortune. Trey dropped his phone onto the glass coffee table. The device landed right on top of the forged loan documents, creating a profound intersection of my family's greatest sin and my ultimate victory. $102 million, Trey repeated softly, the words sounding completely alien in the tense room. He looked at my parents, his eyes wide, with a terrifying mixture of greed and absolute despair. She does not have a sugar daddy. She has $100 million of her own cash. My mother let out a small strangled gasp and covered her mouth with both hands. Her mind desperately tried to process the fact that the daughter she had treated like a worthless maid her entire life was now wealthier than everyone they knew combined. My father slumped back against the sofa cushions, the color entirely drained from his face. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely obliterated. I was no longer just a threat, holding evidence of their past crimes. I was a massive public titan of wealth, and they had spent the last week actively trying to destroy me. The synchronized buzzing of their phones suddenly intensified. It was no longer just breaking news alerts. It was the frantic, endless calls of extended family members, country club associates and reporters who had managed to track down their contact information. The comfortable bubble of their suburban life was violently bursting, and the whole world was watching, while my family was experiencing a complete meltdown. In their suburban living room, I was sitting quietly on the expansive marble terrace of my Bel Air estate, enjoying a perfectly brewed cup of espresso. The morning marine layer had just burned off, revealing a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the Pacific Ocean. I had planned to spend the afternoon going through the blueprints for the new restaurant I was privately funding. But my phone, sitting next to my espresso cup, had other plans. It vibrated once, a short sharp buzz. Then it vibrated again. Within seconds, the device was locked in a continuous aggressive spasm, sliding slightly across the glass patio table. From the sheer force of the incoming notifications, I leaned forward and tapped the screen. The lock screen was a chaotic waterfall of missed calls, urgent text messages and social media tags. The numbers were staggering. 50 missed calls, 100 text messages, 200 new voicemails, and they were all coming from the exact same small group of people who had spent my entire life ignoring my very existence. Unless they needed someone to scrub their floors. I watched the names flash across the screen. Richard Beverly, Sydney Trey. Then came the aunts, the uncles and the cousins, who had happily laughed along when my parents publicly humiliated me at holiday dinners. They were all desperately trying to claw their way back into my life. Simultaneously, I picked up the phone, my expression entirely calm, and navigated straight to my voicemail inbox. I did not need to listen to all of them. I knew exactly what they would sound like. I tapped on the most recent voicemail left by my mother, Beverly. I pressed play and put the phone on speaker, letting her frantic, hysterical voice echo across the quiet luxury of my private terrace. Gemma, her voice shrieked through the tiny speaker, sounding completely unhinged and desperate. Where are you? Why are you not answering your phone? The news is everywhere. They are saying you won the lottery. They are saying you have $102 million. This has to be some kind of insane mistake, right? But if it is true, you need to come home immediately. Do you hear me? Come home right now. We are your family. That money belongs to our family. Gemma, you do not know how to handle that kind of wealth. We need to set up a joint account. Trey is facing a major business crisis, and we need to transfer funds to him by the end of the week, or he is going to lose everything. Call me back the exact second you get this. I let the recording finish. The sheer entitlement was almost physically repulsive. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not apologize for the lifelong abuse, or the recent threat to destroy my catering business. Her very first instinct upon discovering I had money was to demand I surrender it to the very people who had actively tried to ruin my life. She still viewed me as a resource, just a vessel meant to carry wealth back to the golden child and her failing husband. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt or obligation. The emotional chains they had wrapped around me for 33 years had completely rusted away. I systematically went through my contact list. I tapped my father's block caller. I tapped my mother's block caller. I did the exact same for Sydney Trey and every single extended family member who had suddenly remembered I existed. I wiped the slate entirely clean with a few simple swipes of my finger. Then I opened my encrypted messaging app and sent a direct order to Garrison, the head of my private security detail. Garrison, I typed quickly. My identity has been compromised by the press. I expect my biological family to attempt to breach the perimeter of this estate within the hour. They are not welcome here under any circumstances. They are considered hostile. If they approach the main gates, do not engage in conversation. Do not accept any packages or letters. If they refuse to leave the public road leading to the entrance, you have my full authorization to contact the local authorities and have them removed for trespassing and harassment. Garrison replied less than 10 seconds later. Understood, Ms. Gemma. The perimeter is fully secured. The gate cameras are active and my team is on standby. Nobody gets through without your explicit physical presence. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. The continuous aggressive vibrating finally stopped, replaced by the gentle sound of the wind blowing through the privacy hedges. The frenzied aftermath of the media leak was raging violently just outside my walls, but inside my fortress there was only peace. I picked up my espresso cup, took a slow sip, and turned my attention back to the restaurant. Blueprints. I knew they were coming, but for the first time in my life, I was absolutely ready for them. It took exactly 42 minutes for the perimeter alarm to silently trigger. I was still sitting on my terrace, running a red pen across the restaurant floor plans, when Garrison stepped out through the glass doors. He held a secure tablet in his hand and maintained a completely neutral expression. They are here, Ms. Gemma, Garrison announced quietly. A silver SUV is currently blocking the main entrance. Your biological family members are currently standing outside the vehicle. They are repeatedly pressing the intercom button. I set my pen down and took the tablet from his hands. The high-definition security feed showed the massive wrought iron gates at the bottom of my driveway. Parked aggressively across the private access road was Trey's leased SUV. Standing right in front of the primary camera lens was my mother. She looked completely disheveled, a stark contrast to her usual perfectly manicured country club appearance. My father stood right behind her, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Sydney and Trey were flanking them, looking up at the towering privacy hedges with expressions of unfiltered greed and desperate awe. Tap the audio feed, I instructed. He pressed a button on the screen, and the chaotic sounds of the street instantly filled the quiet terrace. My mother was slamming the palm of her hand against the silver intercom panel. Gemma, please pick up, my mother cried out, her voice thick with exaggerated theatrical tears. We know you are in there, sweetheart. Please let us in. We are so incredibly sorry about the misunderstanding at the party. We were just stressed. We love you so much, darling. We always knew you were destined for greatness. Please open the gate. We are a family and family needs to stick together. I watched the screen as my father leaned into the microphone, pushing my mother slightly aside. Gemma, it is your dad, he said, adopting the deep, comforting tone he usually reserved for banking clients. We are so proud of you. I always knew my girl had a brilliant mind for investments. Let us come inside and celebrate properly. We need to talk about protecting your assets. It is dangerous out there. For a wealthy young woman on her own. We are here to help you manage everything. Sydney squeezed her face next to my father's shoulder. She was trying to force tears from her eyes. Gemma, I am so sorry I yelled at you. She whined, her voice pitching up into a sickeningly sweet frequency. You are the best sister in the entire world. I just want to hug you. Please let us in. I stared at the tablet. Days ago they had ordered me to take out the trash. They had threatened to destroy my business. Now separated from my fortune by 20 feet of reinforced steel. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. They were not crying because they loved me. They were crying because they realized they had abused the one person who could save them from financial ruin. Shall I contact the local police department and have them removed for trespassing? Garrison asked, his hand hovering over his radio. I looked at the live video feed for another moment. Watching them humiliate themselves on a tiny screen was satisfying. But it was not enough. I needed them to see me. I needed them to look at the fortress I had built and realized they would never be allowed inside. No, I replied, handing the tablet back to Garrison. Do not call the police just yet. I am going to go down there. Garrison nodded sharply and signaled 2 of his security operators to flank me. I walked away from the terrace through the grand foyer and out the heavy front doors. The walk down my sweeping cobblestone driveway was long and peaceful. The California sun was shining brightly, and the scent of blooming jasmine filled the air. With every step I took, I felt the remaining lingering shadows of my childhood completely evaporate. As I rounded the final bend of the driveway, the towering wrought iron gates came into full view. My family saw me approaching. My mother immediately let out a loud, dramatic gasp and pressed her face against the thick metal bars. My father stood up straight, plastering a massive fake smile across his face. Sydney grabbed the iron bars with both hands, shaking them lightly like a trapped animal. Trey just stared at the armed security guards, walking closely beside me, his jaw clenched tight. I stopped walking when I was exactly 5 feet away from the gate. I did not smile. I did not greet them. I simply stood there, flanked by my security team, looking at the strangers. On the other side of the iron bars, my mother immediately reached her arms through the thick, wrought iron bars, her diamond bracelets clinking against the dark metal. She made a desperate clawing motion, trying to physically grab onto the fabric of my cream designer suit. Come here, Gemma, she sobbed, her voice trembling with an expertly crafted vulnerability. Let your mother hold you. It has been such a stressful week for all of us. I just want to feel my girl's arms around me. I did not take a single step forward. I kept my hands resting calmly at my sides. My security guards mirrored my stillness, their eyes constantly scanning the street for any sudden movements. Are you going to open the gate, sweetheart? My father asked, his comforting tone starting to sound just a little strained. We cannot exactly have a private family reunion out here on the sidewalk. Let us come inside. Trey brought some champagne to celebrate your amazing news. We have so much catching up to do. I looked at Trey. He was standing perfectly still behind my father, holding a cheap bottle of sparkling wine, his eyes darting nervously between my face and the imposing security team. He was the only one who seemed to grasp the true gravity of the situation. He knew about the credit report. He knew exactly what was coming. I am not opening the gate, I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any anger or sadness. It was the voice of a CEO speaking to a defunct vendor. And there is absolutely nothing for us to celebrate together. Sydney dropped her fake pout and stamped her foot. Stop being so dramatic, Gemma, she complained, her true entitled nature instantly bubbling to the surface. You won the lottery. You are richer than God. The least you can do is let your own flesh and blood inside to see the house. Do not act like you are suddenly better than us. Just because you got lucky. I did not win the lottery to become better than you. Sydney, I replied smoothly. I won the lottery. So I would never have to look at you again. My mother gasped, recoiling from the iron bars, as if I had physically struck her. Gemma, how can you say such a terrible thing? We are your family. We raised you. We sacrificed everything for you. That was the exact cue I had been waiting for. I turned slightly and nodded to Garrison. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. It was the exact same dossier Trey had illegally downloaded earlier that afternoon, containing every certified document, every bank statement, and every forged signature from the past 15 years. Garrison handed the folder to me. I stepped forward, closing the distance to the gate. My mother eagerly leaned in, perhaps thinking I was handing her a check or a set of keys. Instead, I slid the thick manila folder through the narrow gap between the heavy iron bars. It landed on the cobblestone street, right at my father's expensive leather shoes. With a heavy, satisfying thud, my father looked down at the folder, his fake smile faltering. What is this? He asked cautiously. That is a complete, certified record of the $100,000 in private loans and high-limit credit cards you took out under my social security number when I was 18 years old, I stated clearly, making sure every single syllable carried through the crisp air. It includes the original applications, featuring my mother's sloppy, forged signature, the bank transfer receipts, routing the funds directly into your personal checking account, and the subsequent default notices that completely destroyed my credit score. For over a decade, the silence that fell over the street was absolute. My father stared at the manila folder, as if it were a venomous snake, coiled at his feet. My mother's mouth opened and closed silently, her theatrical tears vanishing instantly. You did not sacrifice everything for me, I continued, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. You sacrificed me for yourselves. You needed a kitchen remodel and a European vacation for your favorite child. So you stole my identity and left me with a decade of financial ruin. You did not raise a daughter. You raised a credit score. The transformation was immediate and completely terrifying. The sickeningly sweet, loving smiles melted off their faces in perfect unison. My mother's eyes hardened into cold, vicious slits. The fragile, emotional woman begging for a hug was instantly replaced by the cruel, calculating matriarch I had known my entire life. My father slowly bent down and picked up the folder. His hands were shaking, but his jaw was clenched with pure, unadulterated rage. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple. You ungrateful little brat, my father hissed, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying register. You think you can use this against us? You think a pile of old papers makes you untouchable? We are your parents. We gave you life. You owe us everything. Sydney lunged toward the gate, gripping the bars so tightly. Her knuckles turned entirely white. You are going to give us that money, Gemma, she screamed, completely losing her mind. You owe Trey that money. His business is failing because of you. If you do not let us in right now, we will destroy you. We will go to the press. We will tell everyone you are insane. I took a step back from the iron bars, perfectly safe behind my impenetrable wall. I looked at the vicious, snarling faces of the people who shared my blood. They were no longer pretending. The masks were entirely gone, leaving only the ugly, greedy truth exposed for the world to see. The silver SUV violently reversed away from my wrought iron gates, the tires screeching against the pristine Bel Air cobblestone. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was completely toxic. My father sat in the passenger seat, his hands physically shaking, as he gripped the thick manila folder I had just dropped at his feet. He tore the top pages in half, with a sudden burst of anger. But tearing up copies would not erase the federal crimes he had committed. My mother was sobbing in the back seat, but these were no longer theatrical tears, meant to manipulate me. They were the very real tears of a woman, suddenly terrified of federal prison. Sydney was screaming next to her, pounding her fists against the leather upholstery, throwing a massive tantrum over the millions of dollars slipping through her fingers. "Shut up," Trey yelled from the driver's seat, his voice booming over the chaotic noise. "Everyone just shut up and listen to me. We are not going to jail. And we are certainly not walking away from $100 million. He emerged onto the busy Los Angeles freeway, his eyes darting frantically between the road and the rear view mirror. "Sydney, what did you just scream at her back there at the gate?" Sydney sniffled, wiping her ruined makeup. "I said we would go to the press and tell everyone. She was insane." Trey gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "Exactly," he said, a dark sinister smile slowly creeping across his face. "That is not just an empty threat. That is our entire legal strategy." He looked at my father through the mirror. "Richard, you know how wealth management works. What happens when an individual suddenly inherits a massive fortune and completely lacks the mental capacity to manage it?" My father stopped tearing the papers. The sheer panic in his eyes was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating spark. "A conservatorship," my father whispered, the word rolling off his tongue like a poisonous spell. "The court appoints a legal guardian to seize control of all financial assets and medical decisions." Trey nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We go to a judge and we claim that winning $102 million overnight triggered a severe aggressive psychotic break. We tell the court that Gemma is suffering from extreme paranoia, that she is suddenly isolating herself behind armed guards, and that she is hallucinating past traumas. We frame the fraud documents she handed you as part of her intricate, paranoid delusions. She is not a victim. She is a danger to herself." My mother leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the sunlight. "And since we are her immediate biological family, the state would naturally appoint us as her legal guardians." She realized, her voice trembling with a fresh wave of unadulterated greed. "We would have total executive control over the entire horizon. Blind trust." Trey slammed his hand against the steering wheel in triumph. "Yes, but a judge will not just take our word for it. We need a solid paper trail. We need to establish a verified public record of her severe mental decline. Immediately, starting right now." He barked orders like a military commander. "Beverly, get on your Facebook. Sydney, pull out your camera, start posting." My mother immediately pulled out her phone and opened her social media accounts. She drafted a long, heartbreaking post addressed to her country club friends and extended family. She wrote about her deep, agonizing sorrow over my sudden disappearance. She claimed I was experiencing terrifying delusions of grandeur and extreme paranoia. "Please pray for my daughter Gemma." She typed, her thumbs flying across the screen. The sudden shock of her financial windfall has severely fractured her fragile mind. She has locked herself inside a fortress and hired armed mercenaries because she believes her own loving family is trying to hurt her. We are absolutely terrified for her physical safety. Next to her, Sydney adjusted her hair to look appropriately disheveled and hit record on her phone. She stared into the camera with wide tear-filled eyes, adopting the perfect tragic influencer persona. "Hey guys," Sydney whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling flawlessly. "I really need to talk about mental health today. My older sister is going through a devastating psychological crisis right now. We tried to visit her today to get her medical help, but she threatened us. She is completely detached from reality. Please send our family strength while we try to save her from herself." Trey smiled as he smoothly navigated the heavy Los Angeles traffic. The sinister trap was officially set. They were no longer simply just trying to steal from me. They were actively constructing a narrative to legally erase my autonomy and steal my entire life. The morning after the incident at the gates felt remarkably serene. I was standing in my state-of-the-art commercial kitchen, testing a new recipe for my upcoming restaurant launch. The smell of brown butter and roasted sage filled the massive space. I had spent the last 24 hours ignoring the media frenzy outside my walls, focusing entirely on my future. I felt safe, I felt entirely in control. But my family was not quite finished trying to destroy me. My secure phone rang sharply, cutting through the quiet hum of the sub-zero refrigerators. It was not a standard incoming call. It was the encrypted emergency line connected directly to Mr. Harrison, my senior wealth management attorney. I wiped my hands on a clean towel and answered the call. "Gemma," Mr. Harrison said, his usually calm and measured voice sounding noticeably tense. "We have a massive problem. I need you to sit down and listen to me very carefully. Right now." I leaned against the cool marble of the kitchen island. "I am listening," I replied. "Your parents just filed an emergency ex-parte petition in state court," he explained. "They are filing for a full permanent conservatorship over your person and your estate." I frowned, the legal terminology taking a second to fully register. A conservatorship? Like, what happens to elderly patients with severe dementia? Exactly, Mr. Harrison confirmed. Or celebrities who experience highly publicized psychological breakdowns. Your father, Richard, has petitioned a judge to declare you legally incapacitated. They submitted a massive file of sworn affidavits, claiming that winning the lottery triggered a severe, violent psychotic break. They are officially arguing that you suffer from extreme paranoia, that you are entirely detached from reality, and that you pose an immediate physical danger to yourself. A cold chill ran down my spine. The social media posts, the sudden outpouring of public concern from my mother and sister online. It was not just petty manipulation. It was a calculated legal strategy to establish a paper trail of my supposed mental decline. What exactly does this mean for me? I asked, keeping my voice remarkably steady, despite the sudden spike in my heart rate. It means if the judge signs this order, you lose your basic human rights, Mr. Harrison stated bluntly. Your father would be granted absolute executive control over all of your medical decisions and your financial assets. He would have the legal authority to dissolve the Horizon Blind Trust. He would control your bank accounts, your business ventures, and your real estate. He could legally, forcibly commit you to a psychiatric facility and drain the entire $102 million under the guise of managing your care. The sheer evil of their plan was almost breathtaking. They could not intimidate me. They could not extort me. So they decided to completely erase my legal autonomy. They wanted to lock me in a padded room and steal my entire fortune. Using the justice system as their weapon, they attached dozens of printed social media posts. From your mother and sister to the court filing. Mr. Harrison continued. They also included a statement from Trey, claiming you threw fraudulent documents at them in a fit of paranoid rage. Because they are your immediate biological family, the court is taking their claims very seriously. An emergency hearing has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. You must appear in person to defend your competency, or the judge will grant the conservatorship by default. I looked around my beautiful pristine kitchen. My sanctuary was suddenly under siege from a courtroom downtown. My father actually thought he could win. He thought my lack of formal education and my years of quiet submission meant I would crumble under the pressure of a legal battle. He thought I was still the terrified caterer who would apologize and hand over the money to avoid a public scandal. He really believed I would just surrender my newly acquired freedom without a massive fight. He was entirely wrong. Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice hardening into cold, unbreakable steel. Do not file any requests for a delay. Do not try to settle this quietly out of court. We are going to that hearing tomorrow morning. We need to prepare a massive defense, Gemma, he warned. They have hired one of the most aggressive litigation firms in the city. They are going to paint you as an unstable lunatic. Let them try, I replied calmly. I want you to subpoena my family financial history for the last 6 months. I want you to pull every public record on Trey and his tech startup. And I need you to contact my security team right now. I have a very specific piece of high-definition video footage ready. The following morning, the heavy doors of the downtown probate court swung open. I walked into the courtroom, flanked by Mr. Harrison and 2 members of my private security detail. I wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit, my hair pulled back into a sleek professional style. I looked exactly like what I was. A wealthy, competent businesswoman ready to defend her empire. Across the aisle, my biological family was already seated at the petitioner's table. They had spent the entire night coordinating their outfits to maximize sympathy. My mother wore a modest, drab grey dress she would usually never be caught dead in. My father slouched in his chair, intentionally looking exhausted and deeply burdened. Sydney and Trey sat behind them in the gallery, wearing matching expressions of manufactured concern. Next to my father sat their hired gun. He was a highly aggressive litigation attorney, known for destroying reputations in high-profile conservationships cases. The judge, an older stern-looking woman named Honorable Davis, took her seat at the bench and struck her gavel. The emergency hearing was officially in session. The opposing attorney immediately stood up, buttoning his expensive suit jacket with a theatrical flair. He did not waste a single second before launching into a vicious, calculated character assassination. Your Honor, the attorney began, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. We are here today to save a young woman from her own fractured mind. Until recently, Gemma was a simple, struggling caterer. She lived a quiet, modest life. But last month she won a staggering $102 million lottery jackpot. Instead of bringing her joy, this massive sudden influx of wealth triggered a catastrophic psychological break. He began pacing back and forth in front of the judge, gesturing widely toward where I sat perfectly still. He painted my entire life as a series of unstable, erratic choices. He told the judge that my career as a private chef was Actually proof of my inability to hold down a stable corporate job. He claimed I was a drifter, constantly jumping from one kitchen to another, because I lacked basic executive functioning skills. Then he weaponized my newfound independence. Your Honor, within 48 hours of receiving these funds, the respondent completely severed all ties with her loving, supportive family. The attorney argued passionately. She abandoned her apartment in the middle of the night. She purchased a compound in Bel Air and surrounded herself with armed mercenaries. She has completely isolated herself from reality. She is suffering from severe paranoia, genuinely believing that her own parents are plotting against her. This is textbook psychotic behavior. She lacks the mental capacity to manage her own physical safety, let alone a $100 million financial portfolio. We are asking the court to grant Richard temporary conservatorship immediately, before Gemma completely destroys her life or physically harms herself. In a state of paranoid delusion, the judge peered over her reading glasses, looking down at the massive stack of printed social media posts and sworn affidavits my family had submitted. She turned her attention to the petitioner's table. Does the mother wish to speak on the record? Judge Davis asked. My mother Beverly practically leaped out of her chair. She stumbled toward the podium, gripping the wooden edges with trembling hands. It was an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation. She did not just cry. She sobbed. Huge genuine-looking tears streamed down her face, completely ruining her carefully applied makeup. Please, Your Honor. My mother wept, her voice cracking perfectly. You have to help us save my little girl. Gemma has always been so fragile. We have spent her entire life trying to protect her, trying to give her a normal existence. But this money has turned her into a stranger. When we went to her new house to check on her, she looked at us with such terrifying empty eyes. She started screaming about forged documents and conspiracies. That never happened. She is hallucinating. I am terrified. I am going to get a phone call saying she has taken her own life. My mother buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently, as the courtroom fell into a heavy, sympathetic silence. I saw the judge soften slightly, clearly moved by the raw display of a desperate mother's grief. Trey and Sydney nodded solemnly from the gallery, playing their supporting roles flawlessly. They had built a perfect, impenetrable narrative of a loving family, trying to rescue a mentally ill daughter. Mr. Harrison leaned over to me, his pen poised over his legal pad. They are very good at this, he whispered quietly. I did not blink. I kept my eyes fixed directly on my mother's shaking shoulders. Yes, they are, I whispered back. Now let us destroy them. The judge nodded sympathetically toward my mother as she hobbled back to her seat at the petitioner's table. My father wrapped a comforting arm around her trembling shoulders, playing the part of the devoted patriarch to absolute perfection. Judge Davis took a deep breath, clearly affected by the performance, and turned her attention to our side of the courtroom. Does the respondent have anything to present before I make my ruling? The judge asked, her tone suggesting she had already made up her mind to grant them the conservatorship. Mr. Harrison stood up, slowly smoothing the front of his suit. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with absolute confidence. We have listened to a deeply moving story about a loving family desperately trying to save a daughter from a sudden psychotic break. However, we prefer to rely on objective reality rather than theatrical performances. I would like to submit Exhibit A into the official record. It is a piece of high-definition video and audio footage recorded just a few days before my client allegedly lost her mind. The judge frowned slightly. but gestured for him to proceed. "What is the source of this footage, counselor?" Mr. Harrison walked over to the large multimedia display monitor, positioned near the jury box. It was actually captured by the state-of-the-art security system installed at the $4 million residence of the petitioner's daughter, Sydney, and her husband Trey. As a tech entrepreneur, Trey insisted on the highest quality interior surveillance for his new home. "We subpoenaed the cloud backup yesterday afternoon." In the gallery, I heard a sharp, sudden intake of breath. I glanced over my shoulder and saw Trey physically freeze. His eyes were wide with pure panic. He had completely forgotten about the interior cameras he had installed to monitor his domestic staff. My mother's fake tears instantly dried up, and my father's comforting arm dropped from her shoulders like a lead weight. Mr. Harrison pressed a button on a remote control, and the massive monitor flickered to life. The courtroom was instantly transported back to the night of the housewarming party. The high-definition camera angle was positioned perfectly in the corner of the grand foyer, capturing the entire room in stunning clarity. The audio was crystal clear. The video started exactly at the moment my tray slipped. The loud crash of the champagne flute breaking echoed through the quiet courtroom. Every head turned toward the screen. The attendees watched as my mother, the same woman who had just sobbed about her fragile little girl, stomped aggressively across the marble floor. "You are so entirely useless, Gemma," my mother hissed from the television speakers, her face contorted with cruelty. "Look at what you have just done. This rug costs more than your entire catering business makes in a year." The judge leaned forward over the bench, her eyes narrowing sharply. The contrast between the weeping mother at the podium and the vicious tyrant on the was incredibly jarring. Then came the line that would completely seal their fate. My mother grabbed my arm on screen, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "You will be a servant to your sister, so you do not need to cry or make pathetic excuses. You were put here to help her shine, and you cannot even do that right." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom gallery. Even the opposing attorney looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight and staring at his legal pad. But the video was not over. The footage continued, showing my father addressing his wealthy guests. "Some children are born to lead and create immense value," his recorded voice boomed confidently. "Others are simply born to serve. We need visionaries to build mansions and laborious to scrub the floors." Judge Davis looked directly at my father. Her expression had transformed from sympathetic concern to absolute ice-cold disgust. Finally, the video showed Trey stepping into the frame. He smirked, mocking my minimum wage aesthetic, and aggressively shoved the piece of paper into my hand. "That is a $5,000 damage fee." Trey sneered through the speakers. "Pay up, Gemma, or I will have my lawyers draft a lawsuit that will shut down your kitchen by Monday morning." Mr. Harrison paused the video right on Trey's arrogant, demanding face and turned the screen off. The ensuing silence in the courtroom was incredibly heavy and entirely deafening. The grand illusion of the loving, supportive family trying to rescue their sick daughter had been instantly and completely atomized. They were not terrified for my safety. They were the ones terrorizing me. "Your Honor," Mr. Harrison said, breaking the dead silence, "as you can clearly see, my client is highly rational, and she is completely safe." Mr. Harrison let the heavy silence linger before turning his attention to the judge. "The security video clearly establishes that my client is not the aggressor in this dangerous family dynamic," Mr. Harrison stated smoothly. "However, to truly understand why this completely fraudulent Conservatorship petition was filed today. We must look at the petitioner's actual motivation. It is not genuine concern. It is absolute unadulterated financial desperation. Mr. Harrison called our next witness to the stand. A tall, sharply dressed man named Mr. Caldwell took the oath. He was a senior forensic accountant from one of the most prestigious investigative firms in Los Angeles. He carried a thick leather binder filled with certified banking records and corporate tax filings. Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Harrison, began pacing slowly in front of the witness stand. Did you conduct a comprehensive audit of the financial status of Richard, Beverly and their son-in-law Trey? I did, Mr. Caldwell replied, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. The financial documents, acquired through expedited legal subpoenas, reveal a highly coordinated, intentional effort to conceal massive, insurmountable debt from the public. The opposing attorney jumped out of his chair. Objection, Your Honor. The petitioner's financial status has no bearing on the mental competency of the respondent. This is a distraction tactic. Judge Davis slammed her gavel down. Overruled. I am highly interested in hearing why this family is eager to legally control $100 million trust fund. Proceed, Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell opened his binder. Let us begin with Richard and Beverly. They present themselves as wealthy, financially stable suburbanites. However, my comprehensive audit reveals their net worth is actually entirely negative. 6 months ago, they purchased a $4 million mansion for their daughter Sydney. To secure cash for that purchase, Richard completely liquidated his stock portfolio and secretly took out a massive secondary mortgage against his own retirement fund. They are currently drowning in high-interest debt and have missed their last 2 substantial mortgage payments. A low murmur swept through the crowded courtroom gallery. I looked over at my father, the arrogant patriarch, who loved giving financial advice, was suddenly sweating profusely, his face drained of color. My mother stared at the floor, profoundly humiliated. The opposing defense attorney sat back down heavily, rubbing his temples, realizing his own clients had completely lied to him to manufacture this entire case. But the parents' financial ruin is only a fraction of the problem. Mr. Caldwell continued. The primary catalyst for this emergency court filing is Trey and his tech startup. Trey spent the entire last year burning through investor capital with absolutely zero return. 3 months ago, desperate to keep up appearances, Trey signed a $2 million loan agreement with a notoriously aggressive private equity firm. It was not a standard corporate loan. Mr. Caldwell explained clearly. It was a predatory bridge loan with a staggering interest rate. Because he lacked business revenue, Trey secretly used the $4 million mansion as direct collateral. According to the contract, the entire $2 million principal, plus massive accumulated interest, is due in exactly 30 days. If Trey cannot produce the cash, the private equity firm will immediately seize the mansion, liquidating the only physical asset the family has left. They are exactly 30 days away from total bankruptcy. The courtroom was dead silent. The grand illusion of their perfect lives was completely shattered. Every single lie they had told, every theatrical tear my mother had shed at the podium, it was all mathematically deconstructed and exposed as a desperate cash grab. They did not want to save me from a psychotic break. They wanted my lottery winnings to pay off their toxic debts. Your Honor, Mr. Harrison said, turning back to Judge Davis. The petitioners discovered my client's wealth 2 days ago yesterday. They realized She would not voluntarily give them the money. Today they are perjuring themselves, claiming she is insane, trying to hijack her trust fund before the bank forecloses on their lifestyle. This petition is not a medical necessity. It is a highly malicious extortion attempt. Judge Davis looked down from the high wooden bench, her eyes locked directly on my father. The genuine sympathy she had shown just a few moments prior was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, furious glare. She now clearly realized she had almost been manipulated by a pair of criminals into helping them steal my life and lock me away. Trey slumped down in his chair, his hands covering his face in absolute, terrifying defeat. Sydney was breathing heavily, grasping the wooden table. The reality of losing her luxurious mansion finally crashing down on her. The legal trap they had carefully set for me had completely backfired, leaving them with absolutely nothing. Judge Davis did not break her furious gaze from my father. The silence in the courtroom was so profound. You could hear the subtle hum of the air conditioning vents. She slowly lowered her reading glasses, folding them deliberately and placing them on the heavy wooden desk. When she finally spoke, her voice echoed with an absolute, terrifying authority that made my mother physically flinch. I have sat on the probate bench for 2 decades. Judge Davis began, her words sharp and calculated. I have seen families completely tear each other apart over inheritances. I have seen greed make people do genuinely despicable things. But this emergency petition represents a level of calculated malice that is truly breathtaking. You did not just come into my courtroom to lie. You attempted to weaponize the judicial system to legally enslave your own daughter. My mother opened her mouth, perhaps to attempt one final theatrical sob, but the judge instantly silenced her with a brutal strike of her wooden gavel. Do not speak, Judge Davis commanded fiercely. You submitted sworn affidavits claiming your daughter was suffering from a violent, psychotic break. You attempted to strip a highly competent, intelligent young woman of her fundamental human rights, simply because you are facing the immediate consequences of your own catastrophic financial failures. You wanted to lock her in a psychiatric facility so you could plunder her trust fund to pay off your predatory debts. It is extortion wrapped in medical concern. Judge Davis turned her attention directly to the opposing attorney, who was currently staring at his legal pad, wishing he could turn invisible. Counselor, your clients have deeply compromised your professional integrity today, she stated coldly. This petition for emergency conservatorship is denied with prejudice. The respondent, Gemma, retains absolute and complete control over her person, her medical decisions and her financial assets. My father let out a long, trembling breath, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. He reached for his briefcase, eager to escape the suffocating humiliation of the courtroom, but the judge was not quite finished. She picked up the thick forensic accounting binder Mr. Harrison had submitted into evidence. However, our business here today is not entirely concluded, Judge Davis announced, her voice dropping into an incredibly serious register. The financial audit presented in this courtroom contains verified, documented evidence of massive identity theft, wire fraud, and the intentional falsification of loan documents. You stole $100,000 using your daughter's social security number, and your son-in-law secured a $2 million commercial loan under fraudulent pretenses. I will not allow this court to be a silent witness to felony crimes. I am formally ordering the court clerk to immediately forward the entire unredacted transcript of today's proceedings, along with the complete financial dossier, directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the state prosecutor's office. The color completely drained from my father's face. My mother let out a genuine, strangled cry of pure terror. Trey grabbed the edge of the petitioner's table, his knuckles turning stark white, as the reality of federal prison suddenly loomed over his future. The judge struck her gavel one final time. Court is dismissed. I stood up, calmly adjusting my navy blue suit jacket. I thanked Mr. Harrison and turned toward the heavy wooden doors. My security detail instantly flanked me, clearing a path through the crowded gallery. I walked out of the courtroom and stepped into the expansive marble lobby. The air felt incredibly light. Moments later, the heavy doors burst open behind me. My family rushed out into the lobby, enveloped in an atmosphere of absolute panic. My parents were frantically whispering to each other about hiring criminal defense attorneys. Trey was hyperventilating, furiously scrolling through his phone. Sydney, however, was completely focused on me. She stomped across the marble floor, her face flushed with uncontrolled rage. Her perfect influencer facade was entirely shattered. "You ruined everything," Sydney screamed, her voice echoing violently off the high lobby walls. Bystander stopped and stared, as she pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are a horrible, selfish person. You have $100 million. And you just sat there and let that judge report our parents to the FBI." I looked at her with complete apathy. They reported themselves the moment they decided to steal my identity. I replied smoothly, "Have a wonderful afternoon, Sydney." She took a step closer, desperate to salvage some fraction of her shattered ego. "I do not care," Sydney shrieked, her voice cracking with desperate toxic pride. "You can keep your stupid lottery money. I still have my $4 million mansion. And you cannot touch it. I am still better than you." I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit, leaving her screaming her empty victories to the echoing marble walls. The frantic retreat from the downtown courthouse was a picture of absolute chaos for my biological family. Trey drove his leased SUV recklessly through the city streets, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his fingers ached. The interior of the vehicle was filled with a suffocating toxic panic. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably in the back seat, terrified of the impending federal investigation. My father was desperately making phone calls to corporate lawyers, who were suddenly refusing to take his business. Sydney sat in the passenger seat, aggressively fixing her makeup in the sun visor mirror, furiously trying to convince herself that her luxurious lifestyle was still completely secure. "Just drive us back to my house," Sydney demanded, her voice trembling slightly, despite her arrogant posturing in the courthouse lobby. "We just need to regroup at the mansion. Nobody can touch my house. We will host a dinner party this weekend and act like absolutely nothing happened." Trey did not answer her. He pushed the SUV harder, speeding toward the affluent neighborhood. He knew the $2 million predatory loan was sitting like a ticking time bomb on his ledger, but he desperately hoped he still had 30 days to figure out a miraculous solution. He navigated the winding, manicured streets, and finally turned onto the familiar, sweeping driveway of the $4 million property. But Trey was forced to slam violently on the brakes. The heavy SUV skidded to an abrupt halt, the tires screeching against the pristine pavement. The driveway was completely blocked. Parked horizontally across the entrance was a stark, black and white county sheriff cruiser, its light bar flashing a bright, authoritative sequence of red and blue. Standing on the impeccably manicured front lawn were 3 men wearing tactical vests with the words, "Asset Seizure," clearly printed across their backs. "What is going on?" Sydney shrieked, dropping her makeup compact onto the floorboard. "Who are those people on my lawn?" Trey threw the vehicle into park and practically ripped the door open. He sprinted up the driveway, his heart hammering wildly against his ribs. He approached the front porch ready to demand answers. But he stopped dead in his tracks. A professional locksmith was standing at the custom oak double doors, methodically drilling out the expensive brass locks and replacing them with heavy-duty industrial deadbolts. "Hey Trey," shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "What do you think you are doing? This is my property. You cannot just change the locks on my house." One of the county sheriff's deputies turned around and rested his hand casually on his utility belt. "Are you the homeowner on record?" the deputy asked firmly. "Yes, I am Trey. And this is my wife's house," he stammered, pointing frantically at the massive structure. "You need to leave immediately." The deputy pulled a thick clipboard from the hood of his cruiser. "Actually, you are no longer the legal resident of this property, so we are executing an immediate commercial eviction and asset seizure order on behalf of the primary lienholder." Trey felt the blood completely drain from his face. "That is impossible," he argued desperately. "The bridge loan term is not up for another 30 days. They cannot seize the collateral before the contract expires." The deputy flipped to the second page of the legal document. "Normally yes, however, the lending institution discovered massive irregularities in your original application. You submitted fraudulent revenue projections and lied about the equity status of your co-signers because you committed wire fraud to secure the funds. The lender utilized the breach of contract clause. They legally accelerated the debt. The entire $2 million became due at midnight last night. Since you did not pay, they foreclosed on the collateral. This morning, Sydney had finally stumbled out of the SUV and ran up the driveway, just in time to hear the deputy's explanation. She stared in absolute horror at her beautiful custom oak doors. Taped directly over the newly installed deadbolt was a massive, bright neon orange paper. It read foreclosure in bold, unmistakable block letters. "No," Sydney screamed, lunging toward the porch. "You cannot do this. All of my designer clothes are in there. My jewelry is in there. This is my house." The deputy stepped into her path, blocking her from reaching the front door. "I am sorry, but all physical assets inside the structure are currently frozen, pending a full inventory by the creditors. You are not allowed to cross this perimeter. If you attempt to enter the property, you will be arrested for trespassing." My parents slowly walked up the driveway, their faces completely hollowed out by the sheer magnitude of the disaster. My father stared at the massive foreclosure notice. He realized in that exact moment that the retirement fund he had secretly drained to buy this house was gone forever. There was no equity left to recover. The predatory lenders had consumed everything. Sydney collapsed onto the perfectly trimmed grass, her expensive dress wrinkling beneath her, as she wailed in total despair. Trey stood frozen, staring at the flashing lights of the police cruiser, his fake empire reduced to absolute dust. The grand illusion was entirely over. They were locked out, completely broke, and waiting for the FBI to knock on their door. As the wails of my sister echoed across the manicured lawn, the deep hum of a heavy engine cut through the chaos. A pristine, midnight black SUV glided smoothly up the sweeping cobblestone driveway, pulling to a silent halt right behind the flashing lights of the county sheriff cruiser. The tinted rear door swung open. My lead security operator Garrison stepped out first, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene with military precision. Then I stepped out onto the pavement. I was still wearing the sharply tailored navy blue suit from the courtroom. looking entirely out of place. Amidst the absolute ruin of my biological family, Sydney stopped crying for a fraction of a second. Her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. Trey snapped out of his paralyzed state. His eyes locked onto me, and the paralyzing fear he had just shown the police deputies instantly morphed into aggressive, desperate anger. He marched down the driveway toward me, his hands balled into tight fists, completely ignoring Garrison, who immediately stepped forward to intercept him. "What did you do?" Trey demanded, his voice cracking violently. He stopped a few feet away, intimidated by my security detail, but too enraged to remain silent. "Did you do this, Gemma? Did you call the lender and tip them off about the mortgage application? Did you use your little trust fund lawyers to dig up the wire fraud and ruin my company? You just could not stand to see us happy, could you? You had to take the house." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his frantic screaming. I simply looked at him with the calm, detached expression of an executive dealing with a highly incompetent employee. "I did not call your lender, Trey," I replied smoothly. I held my hand out to Garrison. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a crisp, heavily embossed legal document. He placed it directly into my palm. I took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between Trey and myself, and held the document out toward his chest. "I did not tip them off," I repeated, my voice steady and perfectly clear, "because I did not need to. When my forensic accountants were auditing your miserable financial history in preparation for the conservatorship hearing, they uncovered the $2 million predatory loan you signed. They also discovered the specific boutique private equity firm holding your debt was actively looking for an acquisition. So I made a phone call to my wealth management team." Trey stared at the document in my hand, but he refused to take it. His chest was heaving. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, a new much darker terror creeping into his eyes. "I am talking about the fact that I did not just win the lottery," I explained, enjoying the absolute silence that had suddenly fallen over my parents and sister. "I used a very small fraction of my new wealth to completely acquire the holding company that owns your private equity firm. The acquisition was finalized yesterday afternoon. I am not just the person you tried to extort. I am not just the woman you tried to lock up in a psychiatric ward." This morning I pushed the legal document directly into his trembling hand. "I am the bank, Trey," I stated coldly. "I am the primary lien holder on this $4 million mansion. I am the sole creditor of your failing tech startup. When I reviewed your loan file last night and saw the blatant wire fraud you committed by faking your revenue projections, I personally authorized the immediate acceleration of your debt. I signed the commercial eviction order. I told the sheriff to change the locks." Trey slowly looked down at the paper. It was the master assignment of debt. It clearly listed his name, the $2 million principal, the exorbitant interest rate, and the new legal owner of the contract, the Horizon Blind Trust. His knees physically buckled. He stumbled backward, dropping the paper onto the cobblestone driveway, as if it had burned his fingers. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He did not just owe money to some faceless corporation. He owed $2 million, plus interest, directly to the woman he had treated like absolute garbage his entire life. He had spent the morning trying to steal my money, in court completely unaware that I already owned every single thing he had left in the world. My father let out a quiet, horrifying gasp. He understood exactly what this meant. The retirement funds he had illegally drained to secure this property were sitting safely inside my investment portfolio. I now owned them completely and entirely. Their destruction was absolutely perfect justice. Trey scrambled on the cobblestone driveway, his hands trembling violently, as he grabbed the master assignment of debt he had just dropped. He read the fine print, his eyes darting frantically across the heavy cardstock page, desperately searching for a clerical error or a legal loophole. "This is not legal," he stammered, his voice rising in high-pitched panic. "You cannot just accelerate a commercial loan because you suddenly feel like it. I have 30 days left on the primary term. I have tenant rights. I have corporate borrower protections. My lawyers will tie this up in state court for years." I crossed my arms, looking down at him as he knelt on the pavement. "You do not have 30 days, Trey. And you certainly do not have lawyers who will work for a man with entirely frozen assets," I said calmly. "Let me explain the exact mechanics of your failure, so you do not waste your time fighting a battle you have already lost. When you applied for this $2 million bridge loan, you submitted a signed affidavit claiming your tech startup had secured 3 major enterprise contracts. You also submitted a verified profit and loss statement showing a highly positive cash flow." Trey swallowed hard, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He knew exactly what he had done. Both of those financial documents were entirely fabricated. I continued, ensuring my voice was loud enough for my parents to hear every single word over the idling engine of the police cruiser. "That constitutes federal wire fraud and a material breach of the lending covenant you signed. Paragraph 4 Section B of your master loan agreement clearly states that any falsification of corporate records grants the lender the immediate right to accelerate the debt. That means the 30-day window is instantly voided. I legally called the loan due in full at exactly midnight last night, when you failed to wire the $2 million plus interest to my trust account. This morning you officially defaulted." Sydney pushed past my father, her face red and streaked with ruined mascara. "But this is my house," she screamed, pointing wildly at the massive stucco structure behind the deputies. "Trey and his stupid business have absolutely nothing to do with my property. The deed is in my name. My parents bought this for me. You cannot take my house just because my husband lied on a piece of paper." I shifted my gaze to my sister, offering her a cold, empty smile. "That would be true if your husband had not used this exact property as the primary collateral for his fraudulent commercial loan," I explained smoothly. "And he could not have done that without the explicit, notarized consent of the original guarantors." I looked directly at my father. Richard was standing, completely frozen on the manicured grass, his breathing shallow and rapid. "You personally signed the collateral agreement," Richard I said, dropping the respectful title of father completely. "You leveraged your own retirement accounts and the equity of this mansion to help Trace secure that cash. He tied this $4 million residential property directly to his failing company because he defaulted under the fraud provisions. The cross-collateral clause was triggered automatically. The Horizon Blind Trust legally seized this asset at exactly 8:00 in the morning. A superior court judge already signed the emergency order. The deed was transferred. This is no longer your home. It is a seized asset in my real estate portfolio." My father took a desperate shaking step forward. He held his hands up in a pathetic placating gesture, the arrogant patriarch entirely broken. "Gemma, please." He begged, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "We can fix this right now. We can hire a broker. We can refinance the debt through my private banking contacts and pay you back every single cent. Just give us 48 hours to make a few calls." You do not want this house. You already live in Bel Air. Just give us a chance to restructure the loan. I do not want your money, I replied, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. And I have zero interest in restructuring a commercial loan with federal criminals. I bought your debt specifically to foreclose on this exact property. There is no refinancing. There is no grace period. You tried to use the legal system to lock me in a psychiatric facility and steal my entire fortune just a few hours ago. Did you honestly think I would leave you with a single loophole to escape your own financial ruin? The brutal logic of my explanation hung heavily in the air. I used their own greed, their own fraudulent signatures, and their toxic debt to construct an inescapable trap. Absolute reality of their situation finally crushed whatever remaining defiance they held. The grand illusion of their suburban superiority shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My mother, Beverly, was the first to collapse under the weight. Her knees buckled. She dropped to the hard pavement, her expensive designer skirt bunching up around her legs. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the sharp stones digging into her skin, until she was near my shoes. She looked up at me, her face ruined by smeared makeup. Gemma, please. My mother wailed, her voice a pathetic screech. I am so sorry. I am so sorry for everything we did to you. We were horrible parents. We were blind and greedy. Please find it in your heart to forgive us. You are a good person. You have always been the good one. Do not leave us on the street. We have nothing left. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize. Just please call off the foreclosure. Call off the federal investigation. I looked down at the woman who had spent my life treating me like a disposable servant. She was not crying because she felt genuine remorse for the decades of emotional abuse or the massive financial fraud she committed against her own daughter. She was crying because she had finally been caught, and she was terrified of the severe consequences. I cannot call off an investigation. That is already in the hands of the authorities. Right now, Beverly, I replied coldly, stepping back to ensure she did not touch me, and even if I could, I absolutely would not. Before my mother could let out another dramatic sob, a second pair of police cruisers turned sharply onto the driveway. Their sirens wailed briefly before cutting off, leaving only the aggressive flashing of red and blue lights. 4 plainclothes detectives calmly stepped out of the 2 vehicles. They bypassed my parents entirely and walked straight toward Trey, who was still kneeling on the pavement, clutching the loan assignment document in sheer terror. Trey, a tall detective, announced, flashing a shiny silver police badge. We have an expedited warrant for your immediate arrest regarding multiple counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and the falsification of commercial corporate records. Trey scrambled backward like a cornered animal, dropping the document completely. No, wait, he panicked, his eyes darting frantically toward my father. It was his idea. Richard told me exactly how to structure the loan. He gave me the house as collateral. You need to arrest him too. He is just as guilty as I am. The detectives did not entertain his desperate accusations. 2 officers grabbed Trey by his arms, hauled him roughly to his feet, and pulled his hands securely behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs, echoing across the manicured lawn, was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. They marched him toward the back of the cruiser, while he continued to sob and scream about my father, orchestrating the entire criminal scheme. Sydney watched her husband get violently shoved into the back of a police car. She looked at the giant foreclosure notice, firmly taped to her custom front door. She looked at our parents, weeping helplessly on the hard ground. Her perfect, meticulously curated influencer lifestyle had vanished. In a matter of seconds, she was left with absolutely nothing. She slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. The arrogant, entitled sister, who had mocked my uniform just a few days ago, was completely gone. She stumbled toward me, her hands shaking violently. Mascara ran down her cheeks in thick dark rivers, staining the fabric of her expensive silk dress. "Gemma," Sydney pleaded, her voice trembling so hard she could barely form the words. "You have that massive estate in Bel Air. You have dozens of empty rooms. Please let me come with you. I cannot stay here. I have no money. I have nowhere to go. Let me stay in your guest house. I promise I will not be any trouble at all." I stared at her, my expression completely unchanged. "I will do anything you want," Sydney begged, tears pouring from her eyes in a relentless stream. "I will cook for you. I will clean the floors. I will do your laundry. I will be your maid, Gemma. Please just let me be your maid." I looked at her ruined dress and her manicured hands. I thought about the apron she forced me to wear, and the garbage she demanded I take out. I slowly shook my head. "No, Sydney," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the driveway. With absolute, chilling finality. "You do not have the work ethic for it." I slowly turned away from my sister, leaving her sobbing uncontrollably. The pristine cobblestone driveway. I walked back toward the waiting midnight black SUV, parked on the street. Garrison opened the door for me. I stepped inside the quiet climate-controlled cabin and settled into the leather seat. Through the tinted window, I watched the chaotic scene unfold one final time. My father was arguing with the deputies, desperately trying to salvage his shattered dignity. My mother was still on her knees crying into her hands. Trey was securely locked in the back of the police cruiser, heading toward a federal holding cell. And Sydney was sitting on the grass, staring blankly at the bright, neon orange foreclosure notice, taped to the front door of the mansion she could never actually afford. I did not roll down the window. I did not offer a single word of comfort, or a dime of my fortune. I simply nodded to Garrison. The driver put the SUV in gear, and we glided smoothly down the driveway, leaving my biological family completely stranded on the curb, with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. 6 months have passed since that afternoon. In the driveway, the swift and brutal machinery of the federal justice system completely dismantled. Whatever remained of my parents' suburban illusion, the forensic evidence Mr. Harrison handed over to the FBI, was incredibly thorough and entirely irrefutable. Richard and Beverly are currently facing multiple federal charges for identity theft and wire fraud. Their wealthy country club friends immediately severed all ties, treating them like contagious diseases. Their sprawling colonial home was quickly liquidated to pay for their massive, mounting legal fees, forcing them to move into a tiny, run-down apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. They spend their days blaming each other for their total collapse, trapped in a miserable, toxic prison of their own making. Trey was denied bail. He is currently sitting in a federal penitentiary, awaiting trial, facing up to 20 years for the massive commercial fraud he orchestrated. As for my sister, Sydney, reality delivered the harshest lesson of all. Without our parents' money to fund her fake influencer lifestyle, and without my catering income to steal from, she was finally forced to enter the actual workforce. The woman who once wore silk, designer gowns and mocked my minimum wage, as now wears a polyester uniform. She works 40 hours a week as a retail associate at a discount clothing store in a strip mall. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she tried to demand special treatment from her manager. on her first day, only to be threatened with immediate termination. She spends her short break scrolling through social media, bitterly watching other people live the life she foolishly believed she was entitled to. Forever. I have remained entirely no contact with all of them. I changed my phone number, fortified my security, and completely erased their toxic bloodline from my daily existence. Tonight, my Bel Air estate is glowing with warm, vibrant light. I am hosting a massive charity gala to benefit culinary education programs for underprivileged youth. The grand foyer is filled with laughter, live music, and the incredible aroma of a 5-course menu, designed entirely by my team. My new restaurant opened 3 months ago, and is already booked out for the next year. I am wearing a stunning emerald green silk gown, standing proudly on my expansive marble terrace, looking out over the glittering Los Angeles skyline. I am not serving anyone tonight. I am surrounded by my chosen family. I am surrounded by brilliant chefs, loyal friends, and people who genuinely respect me for my mind and my character, not for what they can extract from my bank account. The heavy, suffocating weight I carried for 33 years is completely gone. I walk over to the edge of the terrace and pick up a crystal glass of expensive red wine. I look directly into the camera. If you are watching this right now, and you are exhausted from constantly trying to earn the love of people who only see you as a resource, I need you to hear this message. You do not owe your abusers absolute loyalty, simply because you share the exact same DNA. Cutting off toxic family members is not a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep your family warm anymore. Build your own magnificent empire. Protect your peace at all costs. And never let anyone tell you that you are meant to be their servant. I raise my glass in a silent toast. Take a slow, satisfying sip of the rich red wine and smile. The story of Gemma teaches us a profound and often painful truth about human relationships. Sharing DNA with someone does not automatically guarantee their love, respect, or loyalty. For decades, Gemma was trapped in a relentless cycle of seeking validation from parents and a sister who only viewed her as a disposable asset and a financial stepping stone. The most crucial lesson embedded in this narrative is the vital importance of radical boundary setting. Society constantly pushes the romanticized idea that family is everything, and that we are obligated to endlessly forgive our relatives, no matter how egregious or damaging their abuse might be. However, Gemma's journey completely shatters this toxic myth. We learn that it is not only acceptable, but entirely necessary for our survival to walk away from people who actively diminish our light. When toxic individuals show you their true colors, especially when they value your usefulness and obedience over your basic humanity, you must believe them the first time. Furthermore, true freedom isn't just about achieving massive financial independence. It is fundamentally about emotional emancipation. Gemma's ultimate victory wasn't merely acquiring $100 million. It was the precise moment she stopped caring about her family's approval. She stopped playing the assigned role of the obedient, invisible scapegoat. Her story stands as a powerful reminder that our self-worth is never defined by how broken people treat us. We all possess the internal power to step out of the shadows, build our own secure sanctuary, and surround ourselves with a chosen family who values us for who we truly are. If you are currently pouring your energy into people who only take from you, take a step back today and choose to aggressively protect your own peace.